Need a drink.
My name is Francine Belly, and I have two hats here. One of them is that also a program sponsored by Rockefeller Foundation is something that I'm involved in at the moment, where we are helping people in Africa to build digital platform. Is run by the CG, which is an organization based in New York.
And what's the program called?
It's called Digital Africa, Strategic Management and Innovation. And 700 applicants are online on this program, and we are teaching them how to build digital platform. But what Shidi said is something that I've been thinking of. Of course, it's not the technology itself that bring bad or good. It's the business model. This is what we're trying to tell people, that the business model when you are building a digital platform is very valuable. You need to think strategically what kind of interactions you are trying to facilitate. But my real question is that I'm also thinking from a woman perspective. So in this program, obviously, there's less women than men. So my question is from all you practitioners who are on the ground, what actually will be the key factors to help women who have perhaps a business right now who want to use digital skills to improve or grow or scale their business in developing countries and in here as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That's a concise question. Let me take the woman at the back with glasses on, please. Thank you.
Hello, Kate Horsted from Age International. As the population ages very rapidly now, we need to be ensuring that we include women and men of all ages in development efforts. And many older women and men are informal workers too, and there are also specific factors which leave older women digitally and financially excluded. So my question was, how are you ensuring, particularly to Monica, maybe this question, how are you ensuring that women of all ages are included?
Great, another great question. Thank you. Anything from over this side? Here.
Hi, I'm Khan. I'm research officer at ODI. Quick question on two things. One, how about also giving the opportunity to domestic workers who are signing on to this app to rate their clients? That's one. The second thing is a lot of the app makers in the developing world, at least in Pakistan, I can say, male, very young, very entrepreneurial, and do know in an age of women's economic empowerment that these relations can be damaging. So how about targeting these particular young people in terms of the business model that you had proposed?
Okay, right. Can I come back for another round of questions? Let's take these for now, and we'll come back. Monica, there was a specific question to you about older women, but actually I'd like to hear, Ethel might have some interesting views on that. Do you want to start, and then Ethel, I'll bring you in.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a really pertinent and interesting question. And while in the earlier part I talked about how we are looking at young girls and young women, about the older women, yes, our present members, when I'm talking of older, maybe 40 plus, 45 plus, and that also, because from the strata from which they come, it also means that they are semi-literate or just about neo-literates. But the interesting part is that at times we find them even more open than the others, because they're hearing a lot about technology. They are seeing that, when they feel they feel a sense of pride when their children or people around are, using computers or other kinds of technology and smartphones. And today we see that all these older women, maybe 3-4 years ago, if they did not have a smartphone, today they're trying to get, because it's quite affordable. And even our banking institution, Seva Bank, we have the same kind of a finding over there. So Seva's efforts, as far as the organization is concerned, and getting our older women into the whole thing, men also at times, is again the same thing, that if they see the value, if they see value for using the technology, whether it's for their work, like I just said, if it reduces their drudgery, or it makes it more efficient, or it frees up their time to do more gainful work, then they are definitely engaged. And they also find a way that they know that maybe they're not too good at the Facebooks and the something else about the social media, but then they'll be very happy to use the app for transactions, for operations. Maybe even they're very happy to learn something, maybe learn how to and then the other thing is in the local language. So the things, if it's in the local language, and they're much easier. So I said, like, for example, they'll be happy to learn how to construct an Excel sheet, in the with the numbers, writing the numbers in the language they're used to. So we have concentrated, and we've done these digital literacy programs for the last 10, 12 years, even computer training, on focusing in fact, the older generation, the new generation is only coming now, and where we have looked at primarily the value it brings to them, how it helps them to do better, and in the local language. I think those things have really helped them to be included.
I imagine you must now have a really useful depository of data on this as well,
Yes,
because I imagine this is an area where there's very little data.
Absolutely. We do have, and we do keep tracking the data. In fact, we have a membership management system where we keep tracking such things. But yes, we need to disaggregate the data some more, unbunch it and put it together, and that's an ongoing process.
And open it up, hopefully, eventually as well,
Yes,
would be
we hope
ideal.
to.
Yeah. Ethel, can I ask you the same question? So maybe not looking specifically at the informal sector, but broader, sort of in the formal sector as well. Do you see this as an issue that older women are engaging with technology, or are you seeing this as a barrier still, from your experience in Ghana and also more broadly in Sub-Saharan Africa, your members?
So I'm going to try and answer the question anecdotally, right? So
Excellent.
My auntie, who is 60 odd years, when you ask her if she uses the internet, will tell you no, but knows how to use WhatsApp and send videos via WhatsApp and reach out to her customers via WhatsApp. So, and my dad, who's not particularly good with the internet, loves to play golf and has found that he could find wonderful videos on YouTube on how to play golf. So I think a lot of the times it becomes the semantics of the words. I think that especially for apps like WhatsApp and Facebook and things like that have enabled some older people to keep connected, it's used quite a lot. If you look at the WhatsApp numbers across Africa, it's a ridiculous amount of numbers. And so there's a quote unquote a psychological barrier in terms of use of technology. But I see all around me, people use technology in different ways because they see it as a way to communicate with a customer, the way to find information that they need without necessarily thinking about it in terms of technology and mobile and internet and that sort of thing. There's still space to grow there. I think a lot of us are concentrated on young people, but we forget that there is quite a large group of sort of older women and men that are in the space. I did want to add my bit. So there was a question around sort of what you asked about what I wish that we had to enable sort of the growth of on-demand work. I think really, and I really want to come back to really basics of costs, just cost of owning a mobile device, but also cost of internet. So I've lived in both worlds, and I lived in the UK for a bit before I came back home and started my business in Ghana. Now, I didn't spend more than 30, 40, 50 pounds at most a month on internet. Now, in Ghana, I spend 4 to 5 times that for 1/3 the quality and the speed of internet. Now, that doesn't make... So when you start to create on-demand work platforms, you're not going to get the numbers and the growth that you would need. For instance, if you created it in another part of the world, because and this morning, data prices were, I think, went up 3 times in Nigeria. It is that it's great to talk about the potential of on-demand work, but we've also got to really go back to the basics of how much does it cost the people who will then need to access the on-demand work to access the internet to be able to find the jobs.
So it's it's a sort of infrastructure and pricing issue there. Okay. Chedi, let me turn to you with Francine's question about, what is it that, your question is kind of what are the key factors, what do business need, but asking this from your perspectives particular, which I think is an interesting perspective to ask of a union as well. What is it that you want to see from businesses as this market emerges?
I'm sure it will come as no surprise that what we want to see from businesses actually is them not shirking their responsibilities as employers and not using the on-demand economy or the on-demand platforms to shirk those responsibilities. This is part of a trend that we've been seeing, particularly in a globalized economy, for decades. That the risks are increasingly shifted onto workers and away from employers. So you have this pure maximum profit business models from employers, and the risks whether it comes to, finding your own social protection, whether it means, making sure that you are protected from an occupational health and safety point of view, whether it's about, the burden of taxation shifts more and more onto the workers and away from employers. And the big risk of the way that the on-demand economy currently operates is that risk shifts even further onto individual workers and away from employers. So, I think from the ITC's perspective, our message would be that there is huge potential in on-demand platforms, but, not in a way, not in the sense that these can be used to shirk those responsibilities. So the very basics around, worker protection, workers being able to exercise their rights to freedom of association, their rights to bargain collectively, their rights to social protection, all of those remain the responsibility of the employer, and that's why we're seeing so many cases being brought by some of these, I guess more readily recognized platforms, the cases against Uber, but there's Upwork as well, and Deliveroo, exactly.
And it's not to put you necessarily on the spot, Famke, but is the networking model, do you think that then gets round? It doesn't necessarily respond to all those issues, but do you think that's a more promising approach?
It could be, and again, it all comes down to how it's used, and this is, I guess, that the model as you describe it, I don't know it, so, I'm guessing to a large extent here has some similarities, for example, with agency work, so it sounds more like, the employment agency model where there is a relationship between a worker and an employer at the end of it. I may be getting that wrong. But if I can use, again, the domestic workers example is to underline how crucial this is. The legislation that Chris mentioned, the international law that actually sets the minimum standards for protection of domestic workers. And remember, these are workers in pretty vulnerable situations, actually. Really only has teeth where there is an employment relationship, and when you take away that employment relationship, it's very, very difficult then to see how do you regulate those. So those are the challenges, if you like, for the future. How do we make sure that social protection applies to workers in the on-demand economy? How do we ensure minimum working conditions, including wages? How do we ensure the right to organize? And one last point on that, because somebody mentioned, I think, how about workers being able to also rate, if you like, the people that they work for? And in fact, at ITUC, we're setting up this type of platform at the moment. We're trialing what we call, and it's relating to migrant workers, including migrant domestic workers, called the Migrant Recruitment Monitor website, where workers will be able to give that sort of feedback about their experience using, recruitment agencies in particular. But it's also an organizing tool. It's a tool through which they can compare the wages that they receive. It's a tool through which they can compare the working conditions. It's a tool where they can reach out to each other and, have those conversations. So for us, that's, I guess, the main benefit of being able to do that is to use it as well as technology also has its benefits in terms of work organization.
Yeah, that's great. And it's not just that it's not just a two-way street. As you say, there are other benefits that come with that. Abigail, anything to add on those points?
Yeah, a few points there. First, I'll start with some good news. In our research, we did a kind of global mapping of these on-demand domestic work portals, and the good news is we did identify one where there is a two-way rating system in Mexico, and yeah, I mean, what they say is that it's a way that workers can also rate the household or the purchaser on the way that they're treated. So these are the kind of good practice examples that we'd want to see replicated in other platforms.
Can I just ask, do you know if that's resulted in any changes? Is that something you're able to identify? Maybe that's another research question.
It's not something we looked at in our study,
right.
But there was a report that the workers felt that this was a good aspect of the platform.
Right.
Yeah, I think needs more work. But, you know, these are the kind of, as I say, the kind of good examples that could be built in other models. Just I think a point on the business model. One of the things that we saw, for example, in India, where the internet penetration rate is a lot lower and women's, for example, mobile technology use is a lot lower, is that the companies have actually used a lot lower tech means of engaging workers. So in South Africa, we found that it's, you know, as we might know here with the Uber model, that both the worker and the purchaser will use the smartphone to access the app. And what we looked at in the report is that actually in India, the companies are recognising that a lot of women, particularly those who might traditionally be domestic workers, have lower levels of literacy and far lower access to mobile phones and internet. So what they're actually doing is, you might say innovating, is they're going, for example, in some cases to what they say are slum or low-income areas to recruit women workers. And, you know, in other examples, they are putting, you know, kind of advertisements in villages and saying, you know, bring your friend along, you know, we can recruit you face to face. And then they're engaging with the workers through much lower tech means. So this might be much older smartphones through text message, or they might be calling on much older phones. And, you know, the indications are that when the families hear that this is an economic opportunity, sometimes that might be managed by the male member of the family, but it's arguably giving a opportunity to the women to go out and work, which is also problematic because it's then the question about whether their engagement in the labour market is being controlled by the men who own the phone. So I think there's questions around that. But more broadly, you know, in terms of the business model, I would also raise the question, you know, are they on the one hand going out, and in some cases they're saying that they are supporting women entrepreneurs at the bottom of the pyramid. Are they really supporting them whenever we've seen they're engaging them on quite risky models where the risk is put on the worker and they're not taking on any of the responsibility in terms of providing protections? And I think as an extension to that, we can ask, well, okay, on the one hand, they say they're providing opportunities, but on the other hand, are they actually doing it for self-motivated reasons? Because these are workers that will work for lower wages and in a very competitive environment where the service purchasers ultimately see the advantage of on-demand gig economy work as it's very cheap to them. Yeah. Actually, are they seeking these workers because in a competitive business environment where there might be more than one or two, they're able to deliver the services a lot more cheaply? Yeah. I don't know, that's a question.
Okay. Very interesting. Let's take another round of questions. I'm going to come to you first because you patiently waited from last time.
Hello, my name's...
Do you want to take the mic?
Hi, my name's Tembi. I was a journalist for 20 years, mostly in East and Southern Africa, and then in the last 10 years I've done a PhD at SOAS looking at women and their uses of technology in Zanzibar and Tanzania. I started with the old media and then rapidly moved towards new because there wasn't much to say about people's use of print and radio. It was very much around mobile phones. I'm now working on a postdoc, which is looking at how women who are facing eviction in Tanzania are using technology. I really like the points. I very much like the point that you made about the women, lower income women, being very sort of au fait with the apps. That echoed my research as well, that people who are illiterate, seaweed farmers, are incredibly comfortable about, once they've been taught how to use a smartphone, about accessing the global seaweed prices, which I think is very counterintuitive. I like very much what you said about informal economy building on informal economy, and that perhaps that needs, I feel that needs a lot more work about what we mean by informal and what precarious means and what those instabilities means and where the linkages are between North and South. I suppose I've got 1,000 questions, but roughly...
Limit yourself to one, if you would.
Yeah. The one that I think I want to ask is, I think I've read most of the literature about women and technology in Southern and East Africa. I think I've read almost all of it because my PhD took 7 years. There isn't very much. Where do we get money for more research? Secondly, can't we reframe the debate in slightly more robust language? I'm very drawn to how you're viewing things. There are platforms of power, there are global economies, there are global inequalities, there are people who continue to be identified, and it's a race to the lowest, and we have to challenge the sort of, do we not have to challenge the sort of laissez-faire Uberization of it all, and actually really reframe, not talk about tweaking legal things within a very faulty system, but reframe it.
So the wider question.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Great. This woman here.
Hello, my name is Mariela, and I work for Women International. But I actually just wanted to read out a Twitter conversation I'm having with Hassel at the moment, who is one of the providers of on-demand domestic work. And I just had a question.
We're breaking lots of news here today. It's very exciting.
It's happening as we speak. So it's a question both for the panel and for this view around how to respond to this, right? So I just asked them a question or said, are you listening? We're talking about this right now. Mm-hmm. So the response was, hi, Mariella. None of the cleaners working through our platform depend on us for work. Instead, they see Hassel as a way to top up their earnings or find a new customer. Glad to clear this up for you. And then I asked them about how much they're being paid and whether they're being paid the London living wage, and they said they're all earning the London living wage of $9.40 per hour, which is actually not the London living wage. That's like $9.75 per hour. Mm-hmm. And then they suggest that I read up on them first. So I guess my question is, since we're all based in London and these apps are very much, they exist here, a lot of people are using them. A lot of the mostly women that are working, domestic workers are migrant women. Mm-hmm. What can we do from our side here to challenge them and to actually incorporate what Abigail was saying, best practice or from now.
Okay, nice live question.
My name's Anupam Khanna, and I'm actually just flown in from Delhi on my way. I used to be heading the policy group for the Indian IT industry, but now I'm looking at an issue of technology and inclusive development. So what I've heard all of you in the broader topic, not just on domestic, is that you've talked about the technology and the employment relation. You've talked about markets and price discovery. And you've talked about matching suppliers and customers, which is the network effect. And those are obviously three things. But I think in developing countries, especially, the biggest impact of technology is likely to be in how the ecosystem is changing. Mm-hmm. And for example, when I say the ecosystem, let's take two things that have been mentioned. Payment system. I mean, India is going through a situation where there's dramatic change. Mm-hmm. And if you go and talk to people in the it's making a big difference. Today you have the vegetable seller. I was surprised. I was there only for 4 days, and how they are now using Paytm. Things which you thought was going to be done with smartphones, etc. Second, in terms of one of the biggest problems, and I'm focusing on is access to opportunity, and transport is a big constraint. And I spent 30 years at the World Bank on. One of the big things, when I say transport, is both access and security. There again, these things, technologies are making a dramatic change. And that changes the bargaining power of women, of previously marginalized groups, etc. So I'm wondering if anybody has any work which has been done on that side, how that has changed. Yeah. And I would just say that the big issue here is the directions of innovation. Let me just take the Indian IT industry. I spent 3 years there, and last year I did something for ODI on IT in Kenya. And most of these industries are focused on, quote unquote, the major export. India's industry, $150 billion, is providing services to the rich countries. Very little on focusing on developmental possibilities in India. Similarly, I found even in Kenya, although there's a lot of talk of bottom of the pyramid, etc. Right? So my question is, unless you focus on this broader thing and on who's determining the direction of innovation, I'm not quite sure that you will really have it'll rise to the potential.
Yeah, Great questions as well. Thank you, Anupam. Let me stop there because I'm conscious of time. We may have time for another question, we may not, but we can continue the conversation over lunch if not. Monica, can I ask you Anupam's question, the sort of this broader question again? You know, the direction of this conversation, the direction of innovation. How can it be? I mean, I guess we're asking the same question, harnessed in a positive way.
Yeah. So. I think answer this in two parts. One is from the general perspective and one is from SEVA or the informal sector. And when you're talking about innovation, what I said earlier that, the study, I'll talk about the SEVA part first, the SEVA MIT study. We talked about that really what is it that the women want and how do we get them? So one is engagement, or their engagement and doing the discourse in a language, I mean, in a way, the communication in a way that they understand. Because today the tech piece, the technology is looked at as somebody mentioned, young people, men, well-educated, elitist and all that. So that kind of a thing where they're very entrepreneurial. And while they may have the very good intentions, but when they sit down in a room with a group of illiterate, semi-literate women from India or Africa, that kind of a divide is there. So really the innovation, and when you really, what we see is when the women, I mean, for them, innovation actually is a part of the day-to-day life. Like, for example, I said an old clothes vendor, we saw that she irons those clothes or cleans them up and she gets a better rate. So for the women, for the informal sector, I think what really matters is, and how do we is saying is that how it's going to help them in their livelihoods, how it's going to provide the stability, and is what is there. And coming to the general part in the Indian IT industry and their engagement for the sustainability and inclusiveness of the technology, I think, again, our experience has shown that many technology players have shown an interest and have also done a lot of work with our members. And again, what we see is that, how do we bridge it? There's technology available, there's a need over here, the supply and the demand, and sometimes it's aligned and sometimes it's not. So in SEVA we have this, where we take these people who've come from their headquarters all over the world, and we take them to the women's houses. We show them how the day goes by, and we call it an exposure and dialogue program. And so both sides need to understand each other. And we've got examples of, in fact, even currently we are talking to some companies, and we've got examples of innovations which were done with the women, involved and concerned. But again, it's resource intensive. There's the scalability, because again, the technology companies, they're looking for scale, and only then it is affordable. So it comes back to access and affordability, agency, and so the resource intensiveness is there for which, and also building that culture of, using technology or of the digital inclusion. I think this cultural piece is also very important, because especially we have still several areas in India and other parts of Southeast Asia, maybe Africa, where we have these kind of cultural norms which make it very difficult for women to access this or to have the control over it. And so this is the way we're looking at it, but I think with more and more research and more focus, and I think with a little bit more of resource intensiveness in the process, I think we'll be able to see better results in the future, because already a lot of thought and work is happening in this direction now.
And this is a big question. Temi's question is a really big question. If I can ask, is it possible to answer this briefly? I mean, to sort of paraphrase what you were saying, is it okay when there's such significant power imbalances and inequality in the analog version of this work? Are you replicating this in the digital world? And is that can you make changes here, or do you think you need to go back to the analog version and make all the changes? I know it's a big question. I'd like to get everyone's perspective on this, but briefly.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think we're grappling with this, and probably that's one of the the major areas where we are really trying to look at it. If we just go down to the analog world or to the old ways of doing things and try to set them right, I am afraid we may miss the bus. And I mean, I don't know where the bus is anyway. And so the bus is gone. Yeah. So I think so that's what, we've, I think SEVA has, or even the women, I mean, it's basically driven by them. And I think where they find the value is really what we look at. And one of the big things, which is also one of the drivers in the UNHLP report, is changing the cultural norms. So I think that is somewhere where we are trying to address. And I think that the question, which I found very interesting, that male engagement, that's very important, because, again, if you go back to the issues of control and access, it's the mindset, at least in several parts of the world, which I'm sure most people here are aware of, is that whole patriarchal thing where the male member or the male head of the household feels that, he has to take care of his daughter. So he's well-meaningly doing all this. And so a lot of change has to happen at that level, the male engagement and, that kind of a thing. So that is where I think we are really focusing on to answer the question of cultural. And second is the what is called a digital asset. So basically, for a girl or a woman to have an access or to have a smartphone and then to be able to use it very constructively. Yeah. So I think.
Anything to add on the sort of the potential to leapfrog over the current paradigm? I don't like that word, but I'm going to reach for it now. That the gig economy offers, or do you think that you need to start from basics?
I think if there's going to be a change, now's the time to do it, because it's becoming more and more entrenched, the working model. And I think if we look at the reason for that, there are many. I think it's easy to talk about, or easier, for example, or more familiar to us to talk about the need for workers and their voice to be heard. There's a huge challenge with the current model because, the companies are saying, well, there's no identifiable employer, there's no easy site for collective bargaining, for example, is one argument that's been used to stop workers' voices being heard by the companies. And I think absolutely the workers need to be able to organise and have their voices heard, absolutely critical. But there's another point, which is that there's three sides to this triangle. There's the company, there's the worker, and there's essentially the consumer. And what is driving this is that people want very cheap, easily accessible, reliable services at their fingertips. And that's what they're becoming accustomed to and expect from the on-demand economy. So, it's all very well to sit there and talk about, the workers' conditions, but at the same time, if people aren't, as consumers, also questioning and saying, what's our role in this, in demanding these cheap services, and what are the models which then will deliver those cheap, easily accessible services, without that, actually, it's very challenging.
Yeah, which might speak to a little bit to your point, Mariella, about what we can do. But if I could ask Ethel the same question, so looking specifically at migrant workers, is this something that you've come across? Have you any sort of tech innovation that you found helpful to migrant workers? What can we do?
Sorry, you've got to repeat that. I sort of lost me a little bit there.
So the question we had earlier, which is, what can we as individuals do to support migrant workers who, again, we get back to the question of power imbalances, other actions that we can take as individuals, as consumers, but also because we have a voice in the development policy dialogue, is there something we can do to try and make this more of an enabling environment?
Well, that's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one. I mean, I suppose and that, again, you mentioned on the side of consumer, obviously you show your displeasure at a platform with your dollars or pounds or your spend. And so if there are platforms that are taking advantage, then you show as a consumer with your power. Now,
and is that happening? Sorry to interrupt. Is that happening in Ghana, for instance? Are you seeing consumers saying we expect? We want good treatment of workers. We expect a kind of minimum standard, not just in the work that's done, but in the way that workers are treated. Is that part of the discourse?
No, it's not, which is unfortunate. I mean, we literally had Uber launched less than a year ago. There have been some platforms, but I don't think we have enough of a quorum, right? There are not enough of these platforms that are making money that are big enough in the country for it to actively begin to affect people in a way where they begin to have conversations about it. So at the moment, I think part of it is, a lot of people signed up to be Uber drivers, and then they recognize that actually they're not making a lot of money, and so they're, especially students who have cars, they've decided it's not worth it anymore. So I suppose the workers are also showing that the platform is not making them enough money, then they are walking away from it. I don't think we have enough of a quorum for it now to become a central point of discussion. I think it's still novelty. I suppose the on-demand workspace, especially in Africa, it's still a bit of a novelty, and I think the novelty hasn't really worn off. I think a couple of years where we have more platforms, especially more indigenously grown platforms, right? So, which have large numbers, we'll begin to see sort of that discourse. From the development world perspective, all I can say is from the policy perspective, or help me shape policy for all the new sort of on-demand platforms that are coming into the space. Bearing that in mind, we actually, so my tech company, the Women in Tech, interestingly, Women in Tech Africa is actually my, that's not my sort of day job. I run a tech company, and one of the things we did in the last years, we worked with the USADF, the US Africa Development Fund, to build a generic on-demand platform that, people that wanted to use in the future, instead of building their own platforms, would work on it. But one of the things that we keep struggling with especially with this platform, which we call Everybody, it's essentially nailing down what the business model is, right? Because we're coming at it from a perspective, not only a commercial perspective, but a social enterprise perspective. And that's very hard to do with on-demand platforms, and how you think about it, and how do you ensure that you can provide a way where the people that work for you still get the maximum out of it, while you as a company still get the cost. That's, so I'm interested in looking at business models, but that's really hard to nail down.
So this speaks to it being,
where all parties.
Sorry to interrupt, just saying this speaks to it again being the right time now to be thinking about what this needs to look like before everything has taken off, and before, as you say, things have reached critical mass in Ghana, where you can make sure there are positive examples and positive models for this already in place, kind of off-the-shelf policies that companies, regulators can look at. I've already had your holiday wish for what's the one thing that you want, Ethel. So I'm going to come back to the panel with, we're approaching holiday period. If you could have one thing now which would, you think, revolutionise the gig economy, what is it that you would like? Briefly, this is our summing up session, so I'll ask you to be brief as well.
Can you just repeat it?
Yeah, if you could have one thing now which you think would be needed or would actually improve the gig economy. So for women working in the informal sector, what's the one thing that could make a difference? And we've talked about mobile access. Is there a change in the business model? Is there a specific that you'd want to see?
I mean, if I had to choose one thing, and it's impossible really to do that I can pinpoint one thing and say this is what we need. Regulation, obviously, but looking at it through a gender lens, looking at it through the lens of developing countries, I would say the issue of social protection and how that applies to workers in the on-demand economy is crucial, and the need for it to apply. If you look at the fact that from a women workers' perspective, there's a huge social wage in social protection, whether it's affordable childcare, whether it's income protection during maternity leave, whether it's measures to close the pensions gap that I referred to earlier. These are things that often really are absent already in developing economies, because we don't have a basic social protection floor, and you're making that gap even worse if you have a bunch of workers who again are not really contributing anything because they're independent contractors, apparently, so they have no social security system through which they can contribute. They're not getting anything back in terms of the social wage because the taxes are not there to create that base. And remember again that in developing countries, there are huge tax incentives to multinational corporations. As well, so you're not even getting that tax base from, you know, the big companies. So I would say, I mean, that would be my focus. It would be, you know, the application of that. But beyond that, because that's a little bit tinkering around the edges, I think the issue of reframing the whole debate and the whole approach is actually crucial. And to use your words, changing that paradigm.
And maybe, coming back to your former point, maybe it's then about sort of building what this dependent contractor role looks like and sort of trying to design a model for best practice for that and all the associated protections that could go with that would be a way forward. If this is a new category of worker, that could be something new. Monica?
Yeah, I think there'll be two parts to what I would like. One is the data. So putting, you know, there's a lot of knowledge, not just in this room, but everywhere, and some way, central way, which some of the IT stalwarts could help us, and getting the data all in one place and then having it disaggregated. That's one. And the second is closing the gender pay divide. So for the same work, you know, women getting paid less than men. And so if technology can help them go up and get the pay divide to be closer or to be equal. Those are the two things.
Great, thank you. Abigail, Christmas present?
Yeah, I think the companies need to listen to those who stand to have least to gain from this, which in many cases is the workers. And I think, you know, what we've heard from our friends over here at Hassel is quite an interesting case where they're saying that the workers are not dependent on these. What I would say things like that say to me is that there needs to be a lot more dialogue, there needs to be a lot more communication between the workers and their unions and collectives and the companies and of course the users themselves to talk about how to create an environment where this on-demand work can become, we hope of course, decent work to some level. And you know what I'd say is that at the moment the on-demand worker force is quite disparate, and you know there's argument to say it's very individualised. But what I would say is that the companies have actually they have a data trove at their fingertips. They have this huge amount of aggregated data, which, for example, in domestic work sector is, you could argue, unprecedented. You know, and again that's a real force that could be used to bring people together into this dialogue on how to improve conditions.
Yeah, and would deliver for Monica's wish as well, and maybe a start to try and think about these broader issues as well. Okay, I know for ODI this is a start of a conversation for us, and it's a start of a research agenda. It's certainly not the end of it, and I found this conversation really useful to help us think about where we need to go next. Of course, research isn't the only thing that's needed, but I think it's vital, and it's a vital contribution to this debate, particularly at this time where it feels like we're in a shifting time, and there is a window to influence outcomes and policy. So thank you so much all for joining. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but as I said, there's lunch outside. I hope you can stay, and I hope you continue discussing this and addressing your questions to the panelists. But if I could just take a moment to thank everyone now who's appeared, and thank the audience. Thank you for coming.